The vast majority of the finance service providers especially in North America, are compliance focused, meaning their main focus is to file your taxes and keep you out of jail or adhere to some set of financial reporting standards like GAAP or something of that nature. And so their job is actually not to help you understand your business. Their job is to like reduce your taxable income.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Scale a Business podcast. My name is Hector Santiesteban and I am your host for today. Our special guest is Marcel Petitpas. He is the co-founder and CEO of Parakeeto, and we're going to talk today about profitability. Marcel, thanks for hanging out today.
Hector, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
We'll get into some of the things that you guys are doing and some of the ways that you guys are helping service-based businesses. But I'm curious, what's the story behind Parakeeto and how did you guys land on profitability as the thing that you guys were going to sort of stake your claim around?
It comes from personal experience. My first business was a small agency. We were doing virtual real estate tours back in like 2015 before you could do it with your iPhone. So we'd go into a house with a DSLR camera and a fisheye lens and this weird gimbal and take like 15 images in one hotspot and then do that, a bunch of times around the house and then turn each of those into a 3D image, then load them all into a 3D modeling software. And it took like 40 hours to make a virtual tour of a house. And at the time, real estate agents were maybe willing to pay me a few $100 to do that work. And so I very early in that business ran into this problem of like margins and cash flow and utilization and like, how do you scale this when there's such a tight margin on the work? And then years later, a good friend of mine who was running a much bigger agency than I had ever run connected with me and said, look, I spend 2 days a week in spreadsheets in my business trying to answer these simple questions that I've got to ask myself every day when I run my company, which is like, do we make money on our clients and projects? Is my team busy enough? What's my capacity forecast look like? What if we do or don't get this work? Are we charging enough? And there's got to be a better way to do all of this. And that was sort of the impetus for starting Parakeeto.
Yeah, it is, especially for a lot of service-based businesses. They start out like the freelancer role and they're like, sure, you'll pay me money, I'll do it for you. And then like they keep going and they look up and they're, maybe I'm just speaking too much from experience, but they look up and they've got this like business that has sort of been built, but there was not a whole lot of intention around what you talked about in terms of pricing and margins and capacity and all that sort of stuff. What are some of the key mistakes or sort of key pitfalls that you see a lot of businesses making that are sort of, stubbing themselves in the foot, or it's that proverbial like needle in the eye that if they just took it out, things would be so much better?
I'm not going to give you the same sort of tropes that you've probably heard a million times around this, like underpricing or not scoping projects properly or not having good project management. And like those are all, to me, very tactical issues that, of course, are true. But I think the real issues are strategic. They have to do with mindset. And so a couple of examples of that are, number one, a lot of service-based businesses look at profitability as a finance problem. But profitability is not a finance problem. It's also not the finance department's responsibility. Because if you think about it, Hector, how much bookkeeping does it take to fix your profitability? It's a trick question. There's no amount of bookkeeping that's going to fix it, right? So if you think about like an iceberg, finance is the tip. It's where you see the profitability problem, but operations is the part that's below the water. That's the part that you actually need to go in and look at and address to figure out why it's happening, what to do about it, and then to actually steer the business in a direction that leads to better financials, which are a lagging indicator. So that's a huge mindset shift that I think a lot of people have to go through, is like they get really myopic about bookkeeping and accounting, and they think that QuickBooks is the place that they're going to get the data and the answers that they need. But it's a small part of the puzzle. And I would argue finance data is some of the least important when it comes to improving profitability. And that's sort of a really big paradigm shift for a lot of people to go through. Because I often find when we speak to them, they spent years bouncing from accountant to accountant and spending more and more money on more complex, accrual accounting and service line and department level analysis, and they still don't really know what the heck is going on. They're still struggling with profitability, and they've ignored the ops piece. So that's kind of one big mindset shift. The second one that I'll say is the order of operations. So in my experience, Hector, people need to make changes to their business in order to improve their profitability. And generally in business, my experience has been that it's not knowing what to do that's difficult, it's knowing when to do it. Right? If I asked you to list 100 ways to improve the profitability of your business, you would have no problem doing that. But if I asked you what was the one that would get you the highest return on time and money invested in the shortest period of time, that would be a much more difficult question to answer. And so to me, the insight for what is the best next thing to work on, the formula for insight is expectations versus reality. And when people start struggling with profitability challenges, I notice that most of the time they go to trying to measure reality, time tracking, better finance and accounting and bookkeeping data. And unfortunately, that is both the most complicated, time consuming, and expensive part of the equation. And without the other half, you get no insight. So the experience that people have is they're like, oh, my gross margin is X or my utilization is Y. And then they kind of sit around a boardroom after 6 months of like working towards getting that data point. And they're like, well, is that good or is it bad? And you can't answer the question. You can't really make a discernment of what that data means because you don't have the other half of the equation, which is, well, what do we expect it to be? What is the sort of max target that we could hit with our current business model? And the thing that's kind of crazy about this, Hector, is the expectations. Those are basically free to create. You don't need any new data, no time tracking, no finance software, nothing. You just have to take the assumptions about your business and structure them in a way where it becomes clear like, oh, we're planning to be successful or not. Our business is capable of achieving X, Y, and Z. And a lot of the times, what we find is most companies are struggling to be profitable because they're planning to fail. And there's no amount of execution that's going to fix that because they're executing on a plan that is fundamentally leading them to being unprofitable and they're just not aware of it. So we can fix like 80% of the profitability problems that people have without ever asking them to track time, without ever asking them to do crazy analysis of historical financials. We can just find the problem by saying, what is your plan today? Tell me about your team, how much they work, how much they get paid, how many hours they're available, how you think about pricing, what your overhead structure looks like. We put all that together in a math formula and go, oh, you're only planning to make a 10% net profit. So when you come in at 8, that's actually pretty good, relatively speaking. You just thought that you could do 30, but that's actually impossible. You're not even planning to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what's helpful about this is that it makes it, a lot of people, they go, I'm not a CFO or I'm not a finance person or I'm not like I don't have this money sort of mind. I'm a web designer or I'm like whatever. They're a service provider. But sort of what you're saying is that, it's more rooted in business than in the bookkeeping. And I think that's helpful for a lot of people.
Totally. And now you raise a good point, which is like the vast majority of agency owners that we work with, they got into business because they're experts at their craft, they're subject matter experts. And not only do they not know much about this side of the business, it's the last thing they want to spend their time on, actually. And so part of the challenge too is like, I agree with you. I think a lot of people are more capable of figuring this out than they think. And in my experience, the best management accountants, which is how I would describe what we do, we're management accountants. The best management accountants I know do not have a CPA, did not go to accounting school, have no finance background. I actually think finance can sometimes be an Achilles heel when it comes to management accounting because it kind of hard codes you to compliance. Whereas the role of a management accountant is to understand how numbers affect the business or to use numbers to create a real model of how the business operates that you can use to make decisions and understand what's happening. And so I find that entrepreneurial intuition is the more important skill set for that kind of work. And to your point, like a lot of these business owners, they have a lot of intuition about their business, actually. They're just not really interested in going and looking at numbers to try and understand this. They'd rather go build a website or, strategize on a brand or, you know, do whatever it is that they're great at. And that makes sense.
Yeah, because I think it's like what you're saying is that you're creating visibility, not for visibility's sake. It's like we don't make a map so we can stare at the map. It's like we make a map so we know where we're going, or it makes it easier for us to get where we want to go. And that's sort of what you're saying.
And I think the thing that people don't realize is the vast majority of the finance service providers in especially in North America are compliance focused, meaning their main focus is to file your taxes and keep you out of jail or adhere to some set of financial reporting standards like GAAP or something of that nature. And so their job is actually not to help you understand your business. Their job is to like reduce your taxable income. And what's funny about that is like a lot of times, and you know this, like they're going to do things that make it less clear how your business is performing because they're trying to reduce your taxable income. So it's like they're trying to make it seem like you made a lot less profit than you actually did, or like it costs you a lot more money to run your business than it actually does, or like your revenue was actually like mostly pushed into next year as opposed to this year because if they can accrue it that way, then you pay less in taxes this year. So those jobs are actually not only different, but a lot of times they're in tension with one another. But I don't think a lot of people realize that. They just think, oh, I have an accountant, I have a CPA. Why doesn't this data make any sense to me? It's like, well, because like the data is doing a different job for them than you're expecting it to do for you. And I think that simple understanding might help a lot of people realize like maybe why they felt so frustrated or so confused by the financial data and why it sometimes feels so disconnected from the day to day that they're experiencing in their business.
Yeah, when we get back from break, so I'm curious about sort of what you've seen businesses do with this, sort of newfound insight, or with this, I might call it power, right? The visibility
Yeah.
that they now have from going in there, and sort of the decisions that they're able to make with their business. Because I think that's really what people are after. Is it's not like no one just wants to have good books or have clear insight into their financials. Again, just for that sake. There's something bigger and greater for their business because of it. So I want to get into that and hear a couple stories right after this quick break. Hey, y'all, today's episode is brought to you by Amplify Media, and we are an AI and content production company. Well, we'd like to think of ourselves as like the fractional media part of your company. Because chances are, if you're listening to this, you probably have a product, a passion, a mission, a message, some sort of service you're trying to get out to the world, but you might not have the time, the team, or the tech skills to be able to do it. If that's the case, we can help. Go to amplifymedia.com. That's AMPLAFY media.com. Get all the details. You can also check the show notes. And with that, let's get back to Marcel. So you can sort of take this anywhere you want, Marcel, but I'm curious for you, when you think about like whether it's the coolest thing or the wildest thing or like the most awesome thing that someone's been able to do, after utilizing and implementing some of the things that you're talking about, what comes to mind for you?
There's a couple of really great stories. The two that come to mind for me are one, we worked with a firm that they had been sort of stuck around the million and a half dollars a year mark. And one of the things that was really kind of tough about their business was the nature of their work. It was very project based, and they had these wild swings in utilization. And so there would be weeks where their teams like just absolutely slammed, working 100 hours a week for a couple weeks on end. And then they would have like no work to do, and everybody would go back to being like not that busy for several weeks. And but then of course they would find all kinds of internal projects to work on and all kinds of busy work. And then they would get a bunch of projects and they would be slammed again. And it was interesting because they really weren't that profitable, because those peaks and valleys, right? By the end of the year, it sort of averaged out at sort of a very mediocre utilization rate, meaning that they were paying salaries for people, but a very small percentage, or not a high enough percentage, I should say, of their time was being used for client work. But the team still felt like super burnt out because the peaks were so extreme and then the valleys were sort of undoing all of that hard work that they were doing. And we were able to come in, work with this firm. We started by building a model which really helped them understand like what their targets actually looked like, what their capacity actually looked like. We then built out a forecast for them so they could get much more deliberate about the timing of when projects started and ended. And it, I think, really helped them develop a lot more discipline too around business development. So they were selling more consistently, and they were really focused on like keeping the right amount of work coming in at the right time for their team. And that business was able to grow. We, over 3 years, we worked with them 45, 60, and then 90% year over year, and their profitability tripled in the process, and their team worked significantly less overtime in the process. And so it's like these two things that people think are in conflict with one another, which is like high growth, high profitability in a service-based business, and the team was actually like less burnt out and less overworked because we were able to create a more consistent work life for them, all because they just had better visibility into what they were doing, into what projects were working, into what to sell and when. So that was a really cool story, and that was a great team. We had a lot of fun working with them.
I'm reminded of this often, but I don't think you can be reminded of it enough. Is it's like I think early on in my business, I was taking a road trip and not knowing how fast I was going and how much gas was in the car, like how much left did I. It was just flying blind, just like riding on hope and prayers. And it was like we made it somehow, we got here. But what you're talking about is really like having some. You said visibility. I think that's a great word, but it's just understanding some knowledge of what is actually happening in the business, as opposed to these assumptions or hopes, or some people. I know I've been at times where you just sort of out of sight, out of mind, or you turn your head away from it, hoping that it doesn't blow up on you. But these things sort of force you to see what's real, and then you can make some actual decisions on it.
100%. And that's really like, at the end of the day, that's what we're selling. It's not data, it's not reports, it's not consulting, it's not, financial coaching. What we're selling is clarity, and ultimately it's confidence. And when I think about like our mission as a company, it's to have like you, the founder of your business, to be fearless and to be confident and to be operating from a place of like not having financial scarcity, but feeling like you have financial abundance. And what we've seen is that when we put founders in that position, they do amazing things for their team. They do their best work for their clients. They do their best work for their community. Like they do good in the world because they're coming from a place of fearlessness. And like that is ultimately what it's about for us. And, I think that's important because agency is ultimately like, if we agree that the backbone of America is small business, agencies are the backbone of small business. So like who better to serve than the people that are serving like all of these small businesses that make our communities like really, really cool to live in. So to get a little bit ephemeral, like that's I think what really lights me up about this and the real impact that matters more than the money, I think, for everyone involved.
Yeah. What do you think is, or how are you either coaching your clients or helping your clients to realize some of the opportunities that's coming with all of this change, whether it's technological change, economic change, geopolitical? I mean, like the weather, there's so much going on that's just
Yeah.
evolving that,
Yeah.
I'm of the mind that that creates a lot of opportunities, but also it requires change. It does
Yeah.
like that evolution is a process. Are there opportunities or are there things like a signal in the noise that you think is worth paying attention to?
This is a great question. I want to try and keep my answer concise because I could talk about this for like an hour. So I think it creates challenges. But the first thing I'll say is that my philosophy on business is that all business is solving a problem and creating a mechanism, which is the business, which is basically a tool for repeatably solving that problem. And what happens when you solve a problem is you create value, right? And so the idea is, okay, we create a business that's basically a machine that goes and solves a problem. There's value that is extracted from that, and we want to capture some percentage of that value and make a profit out of it. And generally, we think of that ratio as like if we can capture 10% of the value that we create in the marketplace and make a profit off that, that's a great business, right? So there are going to be a ton of new problems that are created by this emergence of AI, problems that we don't even know are going to exist. In the same way that, like, we didn't know that running Facebook ads was going to be such a pain in the ass in 2006, but it was, and it has been, and it continues to be. And therefore, there's an entire multi billion-dollar industry of just people whose job is to like run Facebook ad campaigns for people because it's such an atrocious user experience and it requires a lot of expertise, right? So, like, what is that thing going to be for AI or for all the different things that AI disrupts inside of the marketplace? And the thing that I know to be true is that services are the oldest business model in human history. Services have been around since before humans were even humans, since we were still kind of like primates. And interestingly, you might want to look this up. If you introduce currency into like a chimpanzee community, the first business they start is services.
I don't know
I'm
if we
not
need
going
to
to
get
repeat.
into what services they begin with, but you're
Yeah, well,
absolutely
I
right.
think I think your logic, you know where we go with this, but like this, it is literally human nature to start a services business. Is part of the reason that about 70% of the economy is made up of service businesses. So it's the oldest standing business model in human history. I believe that it will never go away because it is the most efficient medium for adapting to change in the marketplace, and change creates new problems. And so, like, by definition, if you think about, all businesses are made up of different mediums. You have services, you have software, you have products. But software and products, like, they're all slow to create and iterate. Even with Claude Code and all this stuff that's coming out, it's like nothing is faster than me showing up and just like adapting in real time to your problem. So services are here to stay, expertise is here to stay. And what's interesting is I spent a lot of time in the SaaS world. I spent a decade coaching in SaaS Academy, which is the largest B2B software coaching program in the world. And what I can tell you is that SaaS is moving to outcome based pricing. And there's actually a lot of venture capital that's pouring into service as a software, where they're actually going and buying physical service businesses like logistics companies, moving companies, and then building AI to leverage the crap out of them, and then acquiring a whole bunch of those other businesses to tuck them into this platform as a PE roll up play. And so you have like SaaS moving towards results based. And like, what's the thing we've been talking about in services for a decade? Value based, outcome based pricing. So everyone is converging basically on the point of business, which is deliver an outcome, capture a portion of the value that that outcome creates. And so I think the exciting opportunity is that services have been so poo pooed on by the venture capital community for the last 10 years. And I think it's so asinine because if you look under the hood of every B2B SaaS company on the planet, you have a massive professional services
Sure.
organization, right? They've just been calling it onboarding and customer success and customization and doing it for free and letting SoftBank cover the bill because they raised $100 million in venture capital money. But like that's human capital. And today, what are they doing? They're monetizing it. Even ClickUp is selling professional services, for God's sakes. Salesforce created a multi-billion-dollar industry around professional services. So like it's always been there. Venture capitalists just kind of wanted to pretend that it wasn't there and do some financial engineering to pretend that they had 95% margins, but it was never true. And now all of that is sort of coming to a head. All the valuations are getting adjusted, and everybody's realizing, hey, you know what? Like the margins on service businesses that are well run and technology leveraged are actually pretty good. And
Right.
that is the opportunity, right? Is like everyone is basically converging on the thing that we've been circling for millennia as a human race, which is like the point of commerce is to solve problems, deliver an outcome, and capture a percentage of the value. The mediums are somewhat irrelevant. And therefore, as a service business, I think your ability to innovate, to raise money, to take on a ton of market share, and I think use M&A to grow insanely fast. All of these things are coming together at the same moment. This massive technological innovation with a huge turnover in ownership and a whole bunch of existing businesses that could be incredibly leveraged with this technology. And so I think, there's going to be a lot of people that are terribly afraid of this. It's too much change for them. They're going to want to get out of the game. But for somebody that's hungry and can understand how to put these pieces together, I don't think there has ever been a wealth creation opportunity as significant as this one. And I'm very grateful to be in the prime of my career as this is all happening.
Well, you took the bleakness out of my perspective for sure. Because I'm like, yeah, the robots. I saw an ad for today about the first robot laundry folder is like it's out for 8 grand. And it's like I'm like, oh well, here it's happening. But I'm encouraged by your perspective, and I do believe that services will find a way to persist. I think products and events will do well in their own way too.
This is the thing about being a narcissist, Hector, is that conveniently, I believe that while I believe that a lot of value is going to accrue to a very small number of people, there's a part of me that's just convinced I'm going to be one of those people. So,
Fair enough.
yeah,
Fair enough.
I might be wrong, but
Well,
anyway,
that's a
that's
better
the benefit of
outlook
how my brain
than
works.
the alternative. So for sure. Two questions to get before we get you out of here, Marcel. The first is if people want to find out more about Parakeeto yourself, some of the tools and resources that you guys have, and you guys put out a lot. Where's the best place for people to go?
Yeah, I would point everyone to parakeeto.com/toolkit, or you can just look up the agency profitability toolkit on Google. We should come up as one of the first results. It's basically a free course that I put together with videos, cheat sheets, tools, and even a free piece of software that you can use to model and measure all the essential metrics in your company without paying us a dime. It's absolutely free. I highly recommend you go check it out. And if you like podcasts, we have a podcast called the Agency Profit Podcast. You'll never guess what we talk about on that show. So you're welcome to check that out. And then, of course, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to stay in touch and send me a DM and talk about any of this stuff, I'm always happy to hear from you.
And we will link that up for you listeners in the show notes as always. Last question for you, Marcel, is in your opinion, what is the secret to scaling business?
I believe the secret to scaling a business is understanding your unit economics. And I say this because I've seen it now. I have owned businesses in 4 different industries now, in professional services, in software, in consumer packaged goods, and in manufacturing. And in all of those industries, the most common reason that businesses fail is usually not because they have a bad product or because they don't have demand or there isn't a market or, their co-founders disagree. It's usually because they don't understand their unit economics. So that would be the biggest thing. I think it's super slept on, but just like knowing what are your margins, what can you afford to spend a customer, how quickly do you get that customer acquisition cost back, and like, do you have a sound business model? Is your business designed to create a profit? And profit is not a bad thing. It's actually a moral imperative. If we agree that like businesses make money by creating value in the world, the only way for them to sustain themselves is to be profitable. And so like the only moral thing to do is to build a profitable business that can continue to scale and deliver more of that value to more people on the planet. And so like I think if we make that mindset shift and then we make sure that our business is architected to do that, I believe the world will ultimately become a better place.